February 25th, 1942, 2:25 a.m., Los Angeles, California. Mrs. Katie Moran couldn't understand why the sky was exploding. Through her bedroom window in Santa Monica, she watched searchlights slash through the darkness, crisscrossing like frantic fingers trying to catch something that wasn't there. Then came the thunder, not from above, but from the ground itself. Every anti-aircraft battery from Manhattan Beach to Culver City had opened fire simultaneously, hurling 1,440 shells of high explosive ammunition into the empty California night. I grabbed my children and ran to the basement, she would later testify to investigators. The whole house shook. I thought the Japanese were destroying Los Angeles. I thought we were all going to die. She wasn't alone. Across a sprawling metropolis of 1.5 million souls, panic consumed the City of Angels. Car accidents erupted in blacked-out streets as drivers fled blindly. Heart attacks killed 2 civilians instantly. 3 more died in traffic collisions. Property damage exceeded $500,000 in 1942 dollars, and the enemy that caused this carnage? The target that absorbed over 1,400 rounds of ammunition? It didn't exist. The Battle of Los Angeles was America's military shooting at ghosts, civilians fleeing shadows, and a nation discovering that sometimes the most terrifying enemy is your own fear. But this wasn't the only time the U.S. military accidentally terrorized its own population. From Hawaii to Panama, from New York to California, the story of America's coastal defense drills is a chronicle of bureaucratic chaos, miscommunication disasters, and the thin line between preparation and panic. This is the story of when America's defenders became its greatest threat, when military exercises transformed into mass hysteria, when the Navy didn't just practice invading towns, it actually did it, often without telling anyone it was just a drill. The invasion that foreshadowed Pearl Harbor. February 7, 1932, 6:15 a.m., Pearl Harbor, Oahu, Hawaii. Commander James Richardson was drinking his morning coffee at the Officers Club when the air raid sirens began screaming. Through the windows overlooking Battleship Row, he watched in stunned disbelief as wave after wave of aircraft descended from the northeast, emerging from the overcast like a mechanical plague of locusts. 152 aircraft, fighters, dive bombers, torpedo planes. They came in 2 waves, perfectly coordinated, attacking with the precision that seemed impossible. The sound was deafening, engines roaring, simulated bombs whistling, machine guns chattering with blank ammunition. Richardson dropped his coffee cup, the porcelain shattering across the floor, forgotten. "My God," he whispered, "they're actually doing it." But these weren't Japanese planes, they were American. And this wasn't December 7, 1941. It was February 7, 1932, exactly 9 years, 7 months, and 1 week before the date that would live in infamy. The attack unfolding over Pearl Harbor that Sunday morning wasn't real. It was Fleet Problem 13, the most prophetic military exercise in American history, and almost nobody learned its lessons. Rear Admiral Harry Yarnell commanded the attacking force. A grizzled veteran with 37 years of naval experience, Yarnell had spent months planning this operation. He understood what most of his fellow admirals refused to accept. The era of the battleship was ending. The future belonged to aircraft carriers and the devastating striking power they could project from hundreds of miles away. "Japan has always started wars without declarations," Yarnell wrote in his planning documents. "If they attack Hawaii, they will do it exactly like this, on a Sunday morning when most personnel are off duty, with carrier-based aircraft approaching from the northeast, where weather provides natural concealment." His plan was radical. Against all conventional doctrine, Yarnell would separate his 2 aircraft carriers, USS Lexington and USS Saratoga, from the main battle fleet. With only 4 destroyer escorts, this skeleton task force would race across 2,000 miles of open ocean under strict radio silence. On Sunday morning, They would launch a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor itself. The goal? Prove that carrier aviation could defeat even the most heavily defended naval base in the Pacific. The defenders knew an attack was coming. They just didn't know when, from where, or in what form. Army Lieutenant General Brant Doane, commanding Hawaiian Department Ground Forces, confidently predicted the Navy would attempt a conventional approach. Battleships steaming directly toward Oahu, easily detected by Army patrol aircraft, repelled by coastal artillery. His staff had prepared for exactly that scenario. They weren't prepared for what actually happened. At 6 a.m. on Sunday, February 7th, Lexington and Saratoga reached their launch point 60 miles north-northeast of Oahu. The carriers turned into the wind. Flight deck crews scrambled to prepare 152 aircraft, Boeing F-4B fighters, Martin BM-1 bombers, and Great Lakes TG-2 torpedo planes. Engines roared to life. One by one, the aircraft launched into the gray dawn, forming up into attack formations that would become grimly familiar 9 years later. The civilian population of Honolulu had been warned that military exercises would occur. What they hadn't been told was the scale, timing, or nature of those exercises. When the first wave of Navy aircraft roared over Honolulu at 7 a.m., civilians poured into the streets, watching in amazement and confusion as mock combat unfolded over their homes. "We thought they were showing off," recalled Margaret Chen, a school teacher who lived in Mana'a Valley. "The planes were so low we could see the pilots. Some people waved, others started crying because they thought something had gone terribly wrong. Nobody knew if it was real or not." At Army airfields across Oahu, Wheeler, Hickam, Bellows, the attack caught defenders completely unprepared. Ground crews were still eating breakfast when Navy fighters screamed overhead, dropping paper bags filled with flour to simulate bombs. The bombs burst on contact, covering aircraft, hangars, and personnel in white powder that marked them as destroyed. Not a single Army aircraft managed to take off. Within 20 minutes, the entire Hawaiian Army Air Force had been theoretically annihilated. Then the torpedo bombers arrived over Pearl Harbor. Flying barely 50 feet above the water, they threaded between moored battleships, dropping colored smoke markers to indicate torpedo strikes. On the decks of USS Pennsylvania, USS Arizona, USS West Virginia, and 5 other battleships, skeleton crews stood helplessly as simulated torpedoes struck their vessels. There was nothing they could do. The attack was too fast, too coordinated, too overwhelming. Exercise umpires, observing from multiple vantage points, made their determination quickly. Every battleship in Pearl Harbor sunk. Every cruiser sunk or damaged beyond repair. Every destroyer at anchor destroyed. Total casualties in a real attack estimated at 7,000 to 10,000 killed or wounded. Duration of attack, 37 minutes. American response, total failure. When Admiral Yarnell's force withdrew at 7:45 a.m., they had achieved total surprise, destroyed the Pacific Fleet, and proven that aircraft carriers could execute devastating strikes with near impunity. It was the perfect blueprint for disaster. All that remained was for someone to actually use it. The civilian reaction in Honolulu bordered on panic. Telephone switchboards at police stations and newspaper offices were overwhelmed with calls from residents demanding to know what was happening. Many assumed actual combat had erupted. Others thought the military had gone insane. The Honolulu Advertiser's headline the next morning captured the confusion. Navy destroys Pearl in surprise Sunday attack. Public panics as war games turn real. The military response to Fleet Problem 13 was even more disturbing than the civilian panic. Admiral Montgomery Taylor, commanding the defending Blue Force, immediately filed a formal protest. The attack was invalid, he argued, for several reasons. First, Yarnell had attacked on Sunday morning when normal military routine was relaxed. This was inappropriate and unsportsmanlike. Second, the aircraft had approached from the northeast, simulating planes from the mainland rather than from an enemy fleet. This constituted deception that violated exercise protocols. And third, and most incredibly, Taylor argued that precision low-level bombing and torpedo attacks were impossible for Asiatic pilots to execute, citing racist theories about Japanese lacking the hand-eye coordination for such operations.
The exercise umpires, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, declared the defenders had won. Their reasoning defied logic. Yes, all the ships had been theoretically sunk, but the rules of the exercise were unfair, therefore the attack didn't count. Admiral William Pratt, Chief of Naval Operations, quietly shelved the results. The official report praised both sides and made vague recommendations about improving Hawaiian defenses. No substantive changes were implemented. Rear Admiral Yarnell was bitter but unsurprised. "We have shown them exactly how vulnerable Pearl Harbor is," he wrote to a fellow officer. "We have proven that carrier aviation can achieve what battleships cannot: speed, surprise, and decisive victory. But the battleship admirals will not accept it. They cannot imagine a world where their massive guns and armored hulls are obsolete, so they will ignore this lesson until the day reality forces them to accept it." That day would come on December 7, 1941. And when it did, Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto would execute an attack plan nearly identical to Yarnell's 1932 exercise. 6 carriers instead of 2, 353 aircraft instead of 152, real bombs instead of flour sacks. But the timing, approach, tactics, and even the day of the week would mirror Fleet Problem 13 with eerie precision. Japanese military observers had watched the 1932 exercise closely. They were aboard fishing vessels offshore, taking notes. The Japanese consulate in Honolulu sent detailed reports to Tokyo. The Japanese Naval War College studied Yarnell's tactics for years afterward. In 1936, they concluded, in case the enemy's main fleet is berthed at Pearl Harbor, the idea should be to open hostilities by surprise attack from the air. American admirals had the same information. They had executed the attack themselves, yet institutional inertia, bureaucratic infighting, and stubborn adherence to outdated doctrine meant the lessons went unheeded. When the real attack came 9 years later, it found Pearl Harbor just as unprepared as it had been in 1932. But Fleet Problem 13 didn't just predict Pearl Harbor. It also sparked one of the first major panics among Hawaii's civilian population. The exercise had been announced, but details were kept secret. When it actually happened, thousands of civilians thought war had begun. Schools locked down, businesses closed, police stations were overwhelmed with reports of enemy aircraft, saboteurs, and imminent invasion. It took hours for authorities to calm the population and convince them it was just an exercise. This pattern, military exercises causing civilian panic through poor communication, would become tragically common throughout the 1930s and early 1940s, and nowhere would it reach a more bizarre crescendo than on a February night in Los Angeles when an entire city went to war against nothing. The Great Los Angeles Air Raid, when fear became the enemy. The evening of February 24, 1942, started quietly enough in Los Angeles. 78 days had passed since Pearl Harbor. America was at war, but for West Coast civilians, the conflict still felt distant, a series of radio broadcasts and newspaper headlines about battles in faraway places. That was about to change. At 7:18 p.m., air raid sirens wailed across Los Angeles County. Lieutenant Colonel John Murphy, commanding the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade, had ordered a precautionary alert after receiving intelligence reports of possible Japanese aircraft activity off the coast. For 3 hours, searchlights swept the skies. Tens of thousands of air raid wardens took their positions. Millions of residents huddled in darkened homes, forbidden to show even a crack of light. Then, at 10:23 p.m., the all-clear sounded. Nothing had materialized. Everyone relaxed. What nobody knew was that less than 24 hours earlier, the Imperial Japanese Navy had made its first attack on the American mainland. At 7:15 p.m. on February 23rd, submarine I-17 had surfaced in the Santa Barbara Channel and fired approximately 16 to 24 shells at the Elwood oil field near Goleta. The attack caused minimal damage, a pump station damaged, a wooden catwalk destroyed, total cost perhaps $500, but maximum psychological impact. For the first time since the War of 1812, a foreign power had shelled the continental United States. The news had spread like wildfire through California. Radio bulletins were cryptic, citing military necessity for withholding details, which only fueled speculation. Was this the beginning of invasion? How many submarines were out there? Would Los Angeles be next? By the evening of February 24th, the entire West Coast was on edge. At 2:25 a.m. on February 25th, military radar operators thought they detected unidentified objects approximately 120 miles west of Los Angeles. The report was fragmentary, unreliable, possibly a malfunction. But given the Elwood attack just 36 hours earlier, 4th Interceptor Command took no chances. Air raid sirens screamed to life across the city. Within minutes, over 12,000 air raid wardens were at their posts. Blackout regulations went into full effect. Every light extinguished, every window covered, every street plunged into darkness. At 3:16 a.m., a searchlight battery near Santa Monica spotted something, or thought they did. It might have been a weather balloon. It might have been a cloud. It might have been nothing at all. But in the tense, terrified atmosphere of a city convinced it was under attack, uncertainty became certainty. Battery D, 37th Coast Artillery Brigade, opened fire. The sound was apocalyptic. 3-inch anti-aircraft guns roared into the sky, sending shells arcing into the sky where they exploded in brilliant flashes. Machine gunners joined in, tracers streaking upward in glowing streams. Within seconds, every coastal artillery battery from Manhattan Beach to Culver City was firing. The sky became a dome of explosions and searchlight beams, a fireworks display born of terror rather than celebration.
Sergeant William Malone, manning a searchlight station on the Palos Verdes Peninsula, described the scene. "We saw something. I don't know what it was. It looked like an aircraft, but it also looked like a balloon, and it also looked like a goddamn cloud. So we locked on with a searchlight. Then everyone started shooting. Once the first battery opened up, everyone else did too. It was like a chain reaction of pure panic." For the next hour and 14 minutes, Los Angeles was at war with itself. Artillery shells rained down across the city as what went up inevitably came down. Shrapnel tore through roofs, shattered windows, punctured automobiles. On 61st Street in South Los Angeles, a shell fragment crashed through the bedroom ceiling of 82-year-old Sarah Hall, missing her by inches as she cowered beneath her bed. At an intersection in Hollywood, 2 cars collided at high speed, both drivers racing through the blacked-out streets in terror. Neither survived. The noise was indescribable. Residents who lived through the bombardment spoke of a continuous, rolling thunder that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dogs howled, babies screamed. Adults wept or prayed or simply stood paralyzed with fear. Many were convinced they would not see dawn. "The shells burst like fireworks above our house," recalled Ruth Marshall, a mother of 3 living in West Los Angeles. "My children were hysterical. We didn't have a bomb shelter, so we huddled in a closet under the staircase. Every explosion felt like the house would collapse. I kept thinking, this is how we die. Not from Japanese bombs, but from our own artillery raining down on us." At Army hospitals across the city, emergency rooms prepared for mass casualties. Doctors and nurses donned helmets and gas masks, expecting waves of wounded from bombing strikes that would never come. At the Los Angeles Times building downtown, reporters scrambled to cover a story they couldn't verify.
Was the city under attack? How many enemy aircraft? What damage had been done? Phone lines to military commands were jammed or redirected. Official information was non-existent. So they published what eyewitnesses reported. Swarms of enemy aircraft, dozens of bombs, fires across the city, invasion imminent. None of it was true. At 4:14 a.m., a ceasefire was ordered. The guns fell silent, the searchlights extinguished. Los Angeles was left in darkness and confusion. In the eerie quiet that followed, one sound dominated: sirens. Police cars, fire trucks, ambulances racing through blacked-out streets to respond to injuries and damage that had nothing to do with enemy action. The Battle of Los Angeles was over. America's military had expended 1,440 rounds of anti-aircraft ammunition, caused 5 civilian deaths, created dozens of accidents, damaged millions of dollars in property, and shot down exactly 0 enemy aircraft. Because there weren't any. The aftermath was chaos compounded by conflicting official statements that turned confusion into controversy. On a press conference on the morning of February 25th, Secretary of the Navy Knox Call made a stunning announcement. "As far as I know, the whole raid was a false alarm and could be attributed to jittery nerves. The city had panicked," he suggested. "The military had overreacted. There had been no attack." But that same day, Secretary of War Henry Stimson contradicted his Navy counterpart. According to Stimson, at least 15 unidentified aircraft had been over Los Angeles. They might have been commercial planes operated by enemy agents based in secret airfields in California or Mexico. Or they might have been light aircraft launched from Japanese submarines offshore. Their purpose: locate air defense installations and damage civilian morale through psychological warfare. The conflicting statements from the 2 highest military officials in the country created a firestorm. Which was true? If Knox was right, the military had panicked and nearly destroyed a major American city through its own incompetence. If Stimson was right, America faced an enemy capable of launching air raids from secret bases on U.S. soil? An even more terrifying prospect. Los Angeles Mayor Fletcher Bowron demanded answers. Local newspapers screamed for explanations. Congress announced investigations. Conspiracy theories proliferated. The Japanese had secret aircraft carriers offshore. Enemy agents were operating freely in California. The military was incompetent. The government was lying. The whole thing was a drill that went wrong. UFOs were involved. That last theory, incredibly, persists to this day among certain groups. The truth established by a 1983 Air Force investigation was both simple and damning. Around 1:00 a.m. on February 25th, military meteorologists had released weather balloons from several locations in Southern California. These balloons, designed to measure wind speed and direction at various altitudes, were approximately 6 feet in diameter and silver in color. In the early morning darkness, illuminated by searchlights, they could easily be mistaken for aircraft. When the first searchlight locked onto a balloon, nervous gunners opened fire. The explosion from the first shell lit up the sky. Other searchlight operators saw the flash and swung their beams toward it. Their gunners saw what appeared to be an explosion near an aircraft and opened fire as well. The anti-aircraft shells themselves, exploding at various altitudes, were mistaken for additional enemy planes. Within minutes, gunners across Los Angeles were shooting at shell bursts from their own artillery. It was a cascade of errors born from a perfect storm of circumstances. Legitimate recent attack at Elwood, unreliable early radar technology, inadequate communication systems, undertrained personnel, and a civilian population terrified of imminent invasion. Add darkness, confusion, and the fog of what people believed was war, and disaster became inevitable.
The Battle of Los Angeles had profound consequences beyond the immediate panic and damage. It accelerated implementation of Executive Order 9066, signed by President Roosevelt just 4 days earlier, which authorized the forced relocation of Japanese Americans from the West Coast. The attack at Elwood and the Los Angeles panic were cited as evidence that Japanese Americans posed a security threat, despite no evidence whatsoever of sabotage or espionage involvement. Within months, 120,000 Japanese Americans, 2/3 of them U.S. citizens, would be imprisoned in internment camps.
For military planners, the incident was a wake-up call about the dangers of coastal defense drills near populated areas. But incredibly, the lesson didn't stick. Throughout 1942 and 1943, similar incidents would occur up and down the American coastline, each one a miniature version of the Los Angeles panic. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, the U.S. Navy conducted a series of massive fleet exercises known as fleet problems. These were not small-scale training operations. They involved hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of personnel, and entire regions of the Pacific and Caribbean. They were the largest peacetime military exercises in American history. And repeatedly, they terrified civilians who had no idea the war happening around them was just practice. Fleet Problem 9, conducted in January 1929, targeted the Panama Canal. The scenario: a Japanese Orange Force attempting to destroy American control of the vital waterway connecting the Atlantic and Pacific. The defending Blue Force knew an attack was coming. What they didn't know was when or from where. Admiral William Pratt, commanding the Orange Force, made a bold decision. He would detach the carrier USS Saratoga with only one cruiser escort, send them on a high-speed run south around the canal approaches, then north for a surprise attack. On January 26, 1929, Saratoga launched her strike aircraft at dawn. They roared over the canal zone, dropping bags of flour on the locks, power stations, and defensive batteries. The attack was a complete success. In a real war, the Panama Canal would have been inoperable for months. But for civilians living in Cologne and Panama City, the attack was anything but theoretical. We thought war had started with Colombia. Aircraft were everywhere, flying so low you could see the pilots. Then explosions. The flour bags hitting the ground sounded like bombs. People were running, screaming, trying to flee the city. The military was supposed to have warned us, but nobody told the civilian population anything. The Panamanian government filed a formal diplomatic protest. How could the United States conduct mock warfare over populated areas without warning? What if there had been accidents? What about the psychological damage to children who believed their country was under attack? The U.S. military response was essentially, "We're sorry, we'll do better." Then they did exactly the same thing 2 years later. Fleet Problem 13, the Pearl Harbor attack simulation, had been preceded by numerous other exercises that caused civilian panics. In 1925, Grand Joint Exercise No. 3 simulated an invasion of Hawaii. The defending forces, caught completely off guard, watched helplessly as fictional Marines stormed beaches on Molokai and advanced toward the interior of Oahu. The civilian population of Honolulu wasn't sure if they were witnessing war games or an actual coup attempt. Local newspapers carried banner headlines: "Mystery forces invade islands, military silent on maneuvers." In 1928, Fleet Problem 8 saw carrier aircraft from USS Lexington stage a mock raid on San Francisco. The attack came in the early morning. Civilians awoke to the sound of low-flying aircraft circling the city. Many assumed an earthquake or disaster had occurred and aircraft were surveying damage. Others, more paranoid, thought the Japanese had somehow managed to attack. The San Francisco Chronicle received hundreds of panicked phone calls. Police stations were overwhelmed. The mayor demanded to know why his office hadn't been informed of the exercise. The Navy apologized and promised better communication. The promise was forgotten within months.
Fleet Problem 19 in 1938 saw another simulated attack on Hawaii. Once again, carrier aircraft struck at dawn on a Sunday. Once again, the defending forces were caught unprepared, and once again, civilians panicked, believing war had broken out. At this point, Pearl Harbor had been successfully attacked in military exercises 3 separate times: 1925, 1932, and 1938. Yet no substantive improvements to Hawaiian defenses resulted from any of them. The most bizarre fleet problem incident occurred during Fleet Problem 14 in 1933. The exercise scenario involved the defending Blue Force protecting the west coast of the United States from an Orange, Japanese, invasion force. As part of the exercise, the Orange Force attempted to land reconnaissance teams on California beaches to gather intelligence. On the night of March 15, 1933, a rubber raft carrying 6 Navy personnel in civilian clothes came ashore at Laguna Beach, California. Their mission: photograph coastal defenses, then infiltrate inland to sabotage key installations. But when they emerged from the surf and began walking up the beach, they encountered a very serious problem. Local police, responding to reports of suspicious activity, were waiting for them. The Navy men, following exercise protocols, refused to identify themselves. They were simulating enemy agents after all. The Laguna Beach police, having no knowledge of any military exercise, arrested them for trespassing, suspicious behavior, and possible espionage. The sailors spent the night in jail before frantic calls from Naval Command finally clarified the situation. The local sheriff was not amused. "You're telling me," Sheriff Jackson reportedly said, "that the United States Navy is sneaking onto California beaches in the middle of the night dressed like spies, and you didn't think to inform local law enforcement? What if we'd shot them?" It was a question with no good answer. The Navy's response was to classify the entire incident and hope it went away. But the larger problem remained. Military exercises were becoming so realistic, so large-scale, and so secretive that they posed genuine risks to civilians and local authorities who had no idea what was happening.
The roots of America's coastal defense paranoia stretched back decades before World War II. In 1898, during the Spanish-American War, a ridiculous but very real panic gripped the east coast of the United States. The Spanish Navy, such as it was, had no capability to attack America's Atlantic coast. Their fleet was concentrated in Cuba and the Philippines. They had no resources for projecting power across the Atlantic. Any military professional would have recognized the impossibility of Spanish raids on Boston or New York. But Americans didn't care about military logic. They saw Spanish warships in every shadow, heard enemy guns in every storm. When rumors spread that Admiral Pascual Cervera's squadron was steaming toward the U.S. coast, panic erupted from Maine to Virginia. Wealthy families fled inland. Merchants removed valuable goods from warehouses. Insurance rates skyrocketed. The U.S. Navy, to its eternal discredit, enabled the panic rather than dispelling it. Under pressure from politicians representing coastal districts, the Navy fragmented its fleet. Individual ships were dispatched to make port calls at anxious cities, providing visible protection that had no military value whatsoever. Battleships and cruisers that should have been concentrated for offensive operations were instead scattered along the coast, demonstrating to frightened civilians that their government cared about their safety. This set a terrible precedent. It established the principle that civilian fear, however unfounded, could dictate military dispositions. It demonstrated that perception mattered more than strategic reality. And it created expectations that during future wars, the military would provide visible coastal defense even when such defense was unnecessary or counterproductive. World War II, when protection became paralysis.
After Pearl Harbor, the Roosevelt administration faced enormous pressure to demonstrate it was protecting the American homeland. The attack had shattered public confidence. If the Japanese could strike Hawaii, what was stopping them from attacking Seattle, San Diego, or Los Angeles? The fact that Japan lacked the capability for sustained operations against the continental United States didn't matter. Americans demanded protection, and politicians demanded visible military presence. The result was a massive diversion of military resources from offensive operations to coastal defense. Tens of thousands of troops were stationed along American coastlines. Hundreds of aircraft were dedicated to coastal patrol. Naval vessels, desperately needed for convoy escort or offensive operations, were tied down in harbor defense. And all of this generated more exercises, more drills, and more opportunities for things to go catastrophically wrong. On June 4, 1942, the Battle of Midway was fought. American naval forces achieved a decisive victory, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and effectively ending Japan's offensive capability in the Pacific. Within days, senior military officials knew that Japan posed no realistic threat to the American mainland. Yet coastal defense measures not only continued, but intensified. Why? Because the American public didn't know about Midway's significance. They still feared invasion. Throughout 1942 and 1943, coastal defense exercises continued to spawn panic. In San Diego, mock air raid sirens triggered a stampede at a movie theater, resulting in dozens of injuries. In Seattle, a shore bombardment exercise by destroyers firing at offshore targets was mistaken for a Japanese attack, causing thousands to flee the waterfront. In Boston, the sound of Army aircraft practicing over the city convinced residents that German bombers had somehow crossed the Atlantic. The pattern was always the same: inadequate communication between military and civilians, realistic exercises conducted without proper warnings, a population primed by fear and propaganda to expect attack, and chaos resulting from the collision of military necessity with civilian terror. One particularly notable incident occurred in May 1943 at Fort Hancock, New Jersey, where the Army was testing new coastal artillery systems. The fort's massive 16-inch guns were to fire at a target being towed by a Navy vessel several miles offshore. The exercise had been planned for weeks. Military personnel were fully briefed. What nobody had done was inform the civilian population of nearby towns that they were about to hear explosions equivalent to several tons of TNT detonating. When the first gun fired, the blast was felt across New York's Harbor Islands and much of northern New Jersey. Windows shattered in homes miles from the fort. The concussion knocked items off shelves, cracked plaster walls, and in one case toppled a chimney that crashed through a roof. Hundreds of panicked calls flooded police and military switchboards. Many callers reported that bombs had struck their neighborhoods. The Army's response was remarkably tone-deaf. A terse press release announced that coastal defense exercises were underway and would continue. No apology, no compensation for damages, no explanation of why settlements hadn't been warned. The message was clear: military needs superseded civilian comfort. People would just have to get used to it.
Perhaps the most insidious legacy of America's coastal defense drills was their impact on children. Throughout the early 1940s, school children across the country participated in air raid drills that conditioned them to live in constant low-level terror. They learned to duck and cover under desks that would provide no protection whatsoever from actual bombs. They practiced evacuation procedures that would have resulted in chaos during real attacks. And they internalized the message that death could come from the sky at any moment without warning. In coastal cities, these drills were particularly intense.
Students in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Seattle, and San Diego lived under flight paths used by both military exercises and routine training. They couldn't distinguish between a B-17 on a training mission and a hypothetical enemy bomber. Every aircraft sound was potentially death approaching. The psychological damage was immeasurable. Psychiatrists who later studied these children documented high rates of anxiety, nightmares, and stress-related disorders. Many developed lifelong aversions to loud noises. Some experienced what would now be diagnosed as PTSD from drills that were meant to prepare them, but instead traumatized them. The cruelty was unintentional, but very real. Adults trying to protect children by teaching them to fear. The civilian toll. When we count the casualties of America's coastal defense efforts during World War II, we must include people who died from their own side's actions. 5 civilians killed in the Battle of Los Angeles, multiple casualties in traffic accidents during panicked evacuations, heart attacks triggered by air raid sirens, injuries from stampedes at public gatherings, property damage running into millions of dollars, all caused by American artillery, American panics, American miscommunication. And that's just the direct physical harm. The psychological casualties were far higher. Millions of Americans lived in a state of near constant anxiety for years. They jumped at unexpected sounds. They distrusted authority figures who told them not to worry while simultaneously conducting drills that assumed attack was imminent. They suffered nightmares, stress disorders, and family disruptions caused by fear that their government had deliberately cultivated. In retrospect, the irony is painful. The Japanese conducted exactly 2 attacks on the continental United States, the submarine shelling at Elwood, which caused no casualties, and a second shelling at Fort Stevens, Oregon in June 1942, which also caused no casualties. American coastal defense measures, by contrast, killed American civilians, injured hundreds more, caused millions in damage, and inflicted psychological trauma on millions. When the simulation becomes reality. On December 7, 1941, the simulation became reality. When Japanese aircraft appeared over Pearl Harbor at 7:55 a.m., some defenders initially thought it was another drill. The pattern was so familiar. Sunday morning, aircraft approaching from the northeast, the sound of dive bombers in the Hawaiian sky. It had happened before, multiple times, always as an exercise. Lieutenant Commander Logan Ramsey, who was among the first to realize this was not a drill, later described the surreal cognitive dissonance. For about 30 seconds, I thought, this is the most realistic exercise we've ever conducted. The pyrotechnics are amazing. Then I saw a plane with the rising sun insignia, and everything made horrible sense. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor killed 2,403 Americans and wounded 1,178 more. It destroyed or damaged 21 ships and 347 aircraft. It plunged America into a global war that would consume 4 years and cost hundreds of thousands of American lives. And it was successful, in large part, because Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had studied the lessons of American fleet exercises that American commanders had ignored. Yamamoto had access to detailed reports of Fleet Problem 13 from 1932. He knew that surprise carrier attacks on Sunday mornings worked. He knew that approaching from the northeast provided concealment. He knew that American defenses were oriented toward battleship attacks, not air raids. And he knew that institutional inertia and bureaucratic infighting meant the Americans wouldn't fix their vulnerabilities even after those vulnerabilities had been demonstrated multiple times. The final bitter irony is that after Pearl Harbor,
After all the panic and overreaction and resource diversion, after the Battle of Los Angeles and the countless other false alarms, the Japanese never seriously attempted to attack the American mainland again. They couldn't. They lacked the capability to project power across the Pacific, sustain operations against an industrialized continental nation, or achieve any strategic objective that would justify the resources required. But fear doesn't require rationality. And so the drills continued, the exercises continued, the panics continued. Throughout the war, American military forces practiced defending against an invasion that would never come, while simultaneously terrifying the civilian population they were sworn to protect.
To understand why Los Angeles erupted in panic on February 25, 1942, we need to examine what happened 36 hours earlier at a quiet stretch of California coastline north of Santa Barbara. The Elwood oil field was a modest operation. It was also about to become the first piece of American mainland territory attacked by a foreign power since 1812. Commander Kozo Nishino commanded I-17, a Type B-1 submarine of the Imperial Japanese Navy. The vessel was enormous by submarine standards, 356 feet long, displacing 2,584 tons, carrying a crew of 101 men packed into spaces barely large enough to turn around. I-17 also carried a 5.5-inch deck gun capable of firing high explosive shells up to 8 miles. On the evening of February 23, 1942, Nishino had orders to surface off the California coast and shell whatever targets of opportunity presented themselves. At 7:07 p.m., I-17 surfaced approximately 2,500 yards offshore from the Elwood facility. The submarine's gun crew scrambled to their weapon. Nishino studied the coastline through his binoculars. There were lights. Civilians hadn't yet been ordered into strict blackouts. Buildings were clearly visible. It was an easy target. At 7:15 p.m., the deck gun fired. The shell arced through the gathering darkness and exploded near a storage tank. For the next 20 minutes, I-17 methodically shelled the oil field, firing between 16 and 24 rounds. Most missed their targets. Naval gunfire from a moving platform at night is inherently inaccurate. One shell struck a catwalk, destroying it. Another damaged a pump station. A third landed near a derrick, showering workers with debris but causing no injuries. Lawrence Wheeler, a foreman at the facility, watched in stunned disbelief from behind a concrete wall. He said, "We heard the first shell coming, this whistling sound that got louder and louder. Then the explosion. Someone yelled, 'Get down,' and we all dove for cover. I kept thinking, this can't be real. We're in California. We're in America. Nobody attacks America." The attack lasted exactly 20 minutes. Then I-17 crash-dived and disappeared into the Pacific, escaping before Navy destroyers could respond. Total damage, approximately $500 in 1942 dollars. Total casualties, 0. Total psychological impact, incalculable. News of the Elwood attack spread across California with the speed of panic itself. Radio stations interrupted programming with fragmentary bulletins. Newspapers printed special editions. Telephone networks were overwhelmed with calls from terrified residents demanding to know if invasion was imminent. The military, with characteristic bureaucratic caution, provided almost no information, which only amplified civilian fears. By the morning of February 24th, wild rumors had consumed the West Coast. Japanese submarines were shelling cities up and down the coast. Enemy agents had sabotaged oil facilities. Invasion forces were massing offshore. Fifth columnists were preparing to strike from within. None of it was true, but truth was a casualty of fear. What made the panic worse was the news blackout imposed by military censors. Accurate information about the Elwood attack, that it was a single submarine, caused minimal damage,
and posed no ongoing threat, was suppressed under wartime security regulations. This created an information vacuum that rumors eagerly filled. By the evening of February 24th, much of California believed full-scale invasion was not just possible, but probable. They expected enemy aircraft, enemy ships, enemy paratroopers. What they got was their own military shooting at phantoms.
The weapons that nearly destroyed Los Angeles on February 25, 1942, were products of decades of American military investment in coastal defense. Since the late 1800s, the United States had been fortifying its coastlines against foreign attack. Massive concrete forts, bristling with artillery, commanded every major harbor. Anti-aircraft batteries ringed cities and military installations. Searchlight companies were positioned to illuminate the night sky. It was an impressive defensive network. It was also, by 1942, almost entirely obsolete. The 37th Coast Artillery Brigade, which opened fire during the Battle of Los Angeles, operated M1 3-inch anti-aircraft guns. Weapons designed in 1917, updated slightly in the 1920s, and fundamentally inadequate for modern aerial warfare. These guns could fire a 12.8-pound shell to an altitude of approximately 27,900 feet at a rate of 25 to 30 rounds per minute per gun. In theory, they could destroy aircraft. In practice, hitting a fast-moving plane at high altitude required not just accuracy, but incredible luck. The problem was fire control. Each gun battery had a height finder, a large optical instrument used to determine the altitude of aircraft. A separate range finder measured horizontal distance. These measurements were fed to a mechanical computer, literally a room-sized device of gears and cams, which calculated firing solutions based on the aircraft's speed, direction, and altitude. The gunners would then adjust their aim accordingly and fire. This system worked reasonably well against slow-moving bombers flying straight and level. It was nearly useless against anything else. Fast fighters, evasive tactics, multiple targets, poor visibility, any of these factors could render the elaborate fire control system worthless. And in the panic of February 25th, with searchlights sweeping wildly across the sky and gunners convinced they were under attack, fire control discipline collapsed entirely. Batteries were firing at clouds, weather balloons, shell bursts from other batteries, and quite possibly nothing at all. The ammunition itself was a marvel of manufacturing, but fundamentally ill-suited to its purpose. Each 3-inch shell was a carefully machined cylinder of steel filled with TNT and topped with a mechanical time fuse. Before firing, gun crews had to physically cut the fuse to the desired time delay, typically 15 to 30 seconds, depending on target altitude. When the shell reached its preset altitude, the fuse would detonate the TNT, creating a fragmentation burst designed to shred aircraft. But this system had a fatal flaw. If you didn't actually hit the aircraft, the shell would detonate at altitude, then the fragments, and often the unexploded nose cone, would plummet back to Earth as lethal shrapnel. Every shell fired was potentially an artillery strike on your own city. During the Battle of Los Angeles, 1,440 shells went up. Every single one came back down. The miracle is that only 5 civilians died.
The soldiers manning coastal artillery batteries in February 1942 were, for the most part, poorly trained civilians who had been in uniform for less than 6 months. The massive military expansion following Pearl Harbor had overwhelmed training infrastructure. Men who should have received months of technical instruction were instead rushed through abbreviated courses and thrust into defensive positions around vital areas. Private First Class Arnold Jensen was 19 years old on the night of February 25th. He had joined the Army in September 1941, received 8 weeks of basic training, and been assigned to an anti-aircraft battery in Culver City. His technical training on the 3-inch gun consisted of 2 days of classroom instruction and 1 afternoon of live firing practice. When the siren sounded at 2:25 a.m., he had been asleep. "We scrambled to the gun," Jensen recalled in a 1987 interview. "I was loading shells, which means I was taking rounds from the ammunition handlers and slamming them into the breech. I had no idea what we were shooting at. Nobody did. The sergeant kept yelling, 'Fire! Fire! Keep firing!' So we fired. After about 20 minutes, my ears were ringing so badly I couldn't hear orders. I was just loading mechanically. Grab shell, load, grab shell, load. I didn't think about what was happening. I didn't think about where those shells were landing. I just did what I was trained to do." Multiply Jensen's experience across 30 to 40 gun batteries, and the scale of the chaos becomes clear. Hundreds of young men, scared and confused, operating complex weapons they barely understood, firing into darkness at an enemy that didn't exist. It was a recipe for disaster, held together only by military discipline and sheer dumb luck. The officers weren't much better prepared. Lieutenant Colonel John Murphy, commanding the 37th Coast Artillery Brigade, was a career officer with 15 years of service. But his experience was in traditional coast artillery. Massive guns intended to destroy ships, not aircraft. Anti-aircraft warfare was relatively new, and the doctrine was still evolving. When he gave the order to commence firing, he did so based on incomplete information, unreliable radar, and the crushing weight of responsibility for protecting a city of 1.5 million people. Murphy's standing orders were clear. If unidentified aircraft approach Los Angeles, engage them. Do not wait for permission. Do not hesitate. Better to shoot at a friendly aircraft than allow an enemy bomber to reach the city. These orders made sense in theory. In practice, they guaranteed overreaction to any ambiguous stimulus.
The radar systems available to West Coast defenses in early 1942 were primitive by later standards. The SCR-270 long-range search radar could detect aircraft at distances up to 130 miles under ideal conditions, but its resolution was poor. It couldn't distinguish between one aircraft and a formation. It couldn't reliably separate friendly from enemy aircraft, and it was prone to false returns from weather phenomena, flocks of birds, and equipment malfunctions. On the night of February 24-25, the radar station at Point Furman detected something approximately 120 miles west of Los Angeles. The operators reported unidentified objects moving toward the coast. What they had actually detected remains unknown. It might have been a Japanese submarine on the surface. I-17 was still operating off California. It might have been weather balloons. It might have been a radar malfunction. It might have been a flock of birds. The technology couldn't tell the difference. This ambiguous radar return, combined with genuine fear following the Elwood attack, created the conditions for panic. When visual observers thought they saw something in the sky, and remember, they were looking for something, which dramatically increases the likelihood of seeing things that aren't there, the radar return provided false confirmation. Of course, there are aircraft approaching. Radar detected them. Never mind that radar was essentially useless for confirming what human eyes thought they saw. The searchlights were equally problematic. These were massive carbon arc lamps capable of projecting a beam visible for miles. They were mounted on mobile trailers and operated by dedicated searchlight companies whose job was to illuminate enemy aircraft for anti-aircraft gunners. But searchlights are only effective if you know where to point them. On a clear night with predictable aircraft approaches, they worked reasonably well. In the confusion of February 25th,
with operators swinging their beams wildly across the sky based on contradictory orders and panicked reports. They created more problems than they solved. A searchlight beam reflecting off low clouds or fog can create optical illusions that resemble aircraft. Multiple searchlights converging on a single point in the sky create a bright spot that can be mistaken for an explosion or an aircraft caught in the beams. During the Battle of Los Angeles, searchlight operators reported aircraft that were actually beams from other searchlights reflecting off atmospheric conditions. Gunners then fired at these illusory targets, creating shell bursts that other operators mistook as additional aircraft. It was a cascade of technological limitations and human error, each reinforcing the other in a feedback loop of panic.
When dawn broke over Los Angeles on February 25, 1942, the city looked like it had survived a bombing raid. Shrapnel littered streets and yards. Windows were shattered across dozens of blocks. Unexploded shell fragments had punched through roofs and embedded themselves in walls. Cars were pockmarked with holes from falling debris, and 5 civilians were dead, not from enemy action, but from American panic. One of the dead was Archibald Lyons, a 50-year-old machinist who died of a heart attack while racing to his air raid warden post. Another was Pearl Coleman, 47, killed in a traffic accident at a blacked-out intersection when her husband lost control of their car while fleeing the artillery barrage. 3 more died in similar circumstances, heart attacks and traffic fatalities caused by panic in a city that had convinced itself it was under attack. The property damage was extensive but random. Some neighborhoods were untouched. Others looked like they'd been shelled, which in a sense they had been. Insurance companies were overwhelmed with claims for damage caused by falling anti-aircraft shells. The federal government eventually paid some claims, but many civilians absorbed losses themselves, considered part of the cost of war. But the psychological damage was the most pervasive. Los Angeles had experienced what psychologists would later call a collective trauma event. An entire city had shared the experience of believing they were about to die. That kind of fear doesn't disappear with the morning light. For weeks afterward, residents flinched at unexpected sounds. Children refused to sleep alone. Adults developed stress-related illnesses. Trust in authority, already damaged by the conflicting official statements about what had happened, continued to erode. The competing explanations from Secretary Knox and Secretary Stimson created a political firestorm. Congress demanded investigations. Los Angeles Mayor Beau Ron called for military commanders to be removed. Local newspapers, led by the Los Angeles Times, attacked the Roosevelt administration's competence and honesty. The whole affair threatened to become a major political liability at a time when the administration desperately needed public confidence in its conduct of the war. The solution was bureaucratic and predictable. Classify everything, release minimal information, and wait for public attention to move elsewhere. A military investigation was conducted, but its findings were marked secret and buried in War Department archives. The official public position became deliberately ambiguous. Maybe there were unidentified aircraft, maybe there weren't, but the military response was appropriate given the circumstances. This non-explanation satisfied almost nobody. But by March 1942, news from the Pacific war fronts was increasingly grim. The Philippines were falling. Singapore had surrendered. Java was under attack. Americans had bigger worries than what had happened over Los Angeles one confused night in February. The Battle of Los Angeles faded from headlines, though not from memory. The Battle of Los Angeles was the most spectacular example of coastal defense gone wrong,
But it wasn't the only one. Throughout 1942 and into 1943, similar incidents occurred across the United States, each following the same basic pattern: military activity, poor communication, civilian panic, and official obfuscation. In San Francisco on the night of December 8, 1941, just one day after Pearl Harbor, air raid sirens sent the city into chaos. Thousands of residents fled into the streets, which ironically made them more vulnerable to the bombing raid they feared. Others huddled in basements and shelters. The all clear didn't sound for hours. No explanation was ever provided for what triggered the alert. Most historians believe it was a false alarm caused by nervous officers seeing threats everywhere in the immediate aftermath of Pearl Harbor. Seattle experienced multiple panics throughout 1942. The city's position close to Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, where actual Japanese attacks occurred, made residents particularly anxious. When military aircraft flew overhead, many civilians assumed they were enemy bombers. When Navy destroyers conducted gunnery practice in Puget Sound, the rumor spread that Japanese warships were shelling the coast. Each panic resulted in traffic accidents, injuries from stampedes, and psychological trauma that lingered long after the immediate fear subsided. New York City, despite being 3,000 miles from the Pacific and supposedly safe from Japanese attack, experienced its own coastal defense panics. The fear here was German submarines and, more fantastically, German long-range bombers operating from secret bases in Greenland or Iceland. In July 1942, an air raid drill that was supposed to be announced in advance went off without warning. Millions of New Yorkers suddenly heard sirens and saw lights being shut off across the city. Pandemonium ensued. The mayor's office issued an apology and promised it wouldn't happen again. Similar incidents occurred 3 more times before the end of the war. The common thread in all these incidents was communication failure. Military authorities, constrained by security requirements and contemptuous of civilian concerns, simply didn't tell people what was happening. Civilians, primed by propaganda to fear invasion and conditioned to expect the worst, filled information vacuums with terror. And local politicians caught between military demands and constituent outrage usually sided with the military, which only deepened civilian alienation and fear.
Perhaps no group paid a higher psychological price for America's coastal defense obsession than children. Throughout the war years, school children across the country, but especially in coastal areas, participated in regular air raid drills that were meant to prepare them for attack, but instead traumatize them. The drills followed a standard pattern. Teachers would blow a whistle or ring a bell. Students would immediately dive under their desks, covering their heads with their hands in the classic duck and cover position. They would remain there in silence until the all-clear signal. The drills were conducted without warning, often multiple times per week. The message was clear: death could come at any moment, and your only protection was a wooden desk that wouldn't survive a firecracker, much less a bomb. In coastal cities, these drills were intensified. Students in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle practiced evacuation procedures that would move them from classrooms to supposed bomb shelters, usually just basements or reinforced corridors. They practiced walking in orderly lines while teachers barked orders. They learned to remain silent so they could hear warnings. And they internalized the lesson that their safety depended on immediate, unquestioning obedience to authority figures who might at any moment be saving their lives. Dr. Margaret Brennan, a child psychologist who studied the long-term effects of these drills, found disturbing patterns.
Children who participated in frequent air raid drills showed significantly higher rates of anxiety disorders in adulthood. They reported chronic nightmares about explosions and death. Many developed persistent fears of loud noises. Some described feeling like they had lived through a war, even though they had never experienced actual combat. The drills created a permanent state of low-level trauma, Brennan wrote in a 1959 study. Children's brains are remarkably plastic and impressionable. When you repeatedly expose them to scenarios where death is imminent, where authority figures are visibly frightened, where the message is hide or die, you create lasting psychological scars. These children never felt safe, even in peacetime. The cruelty was compounded by the drill's utter uselessness. The duck and cover technique would provide zero protection against actual bombs. The evacuation procedures assumed attacks would be announced in advance and would follow predictable patterns, assumptions that would be proven false by every actual bombing campaign in World War II. But accuracy didn't matter. The drills served a different purpose. They demonstrated that the government was doing something, anything to protect children. They were security theater at its most cynical, and children paid the price. While America diverted enormous resources to coastal defense, actual Japanese offensive capabilities against the mainland were essentially zero. After the Midway defeat in June 1942, Japan lacked the naval power to project force across the Pacific. Even before Midway, Japanese planning documents never seriously considered sustained attacks on the American mainland. The distances were too vast, the logistics too complex, the potential gains too small. Yet American coastal defenses continued to expand throughout 1942 and 1943. Tens of thousands of troops were tied down in defensive positions. Hundreds of aircraft patrolled coastlines looking for enemies who would never come. Naval vessels desperately needed for convoy escort or offensive operations remained in American harbors, providing protection that wasn't needed against threats that didn't exist. The resource waste was staggering. Every soldier manning a coastal artillery battery was a soldier not fighting in Europe or the Pacific. Every aircraft on patrol was an aircraft not supporting combat operations. Every gallon of fuel burned on defensive patrols was a gallon unavailable for offensive strikes. The arithmetic of fear was devastating to American military efficiency. Military planners understood this. General Marshall and Admiral Ernest King both argued strenuously for reducing coastal defense resources and redeploying them to combat theaters. But they faced unyielding political pressure. Congressmen demanded visible defenses for their districts. Governors insisted on military protection for their states. And the Roosevelt administration, burned by Pearl Harbor and terrified for another surprise attack, couldn't bring itself to tell the American people the truth. The defenses were unnecessary, the threat was minimal, and the real danger was the resources being wasted on protecting against an invasion that would never come.
After the war ended in August 1945, there should have been a comprehensive examination of America's coastal defense efforts. The obvious questions demanded answers. Why were so many resources wasted on defending against attacks that never materialized? Why were civilians repeatedly terrified by their own military? Why did the Battle of Los Angeles happen? Who was held accountable? The answer to the last question is nobody. Lieutenant Colonel John Murphy, who gave the order to commence firing in Los Angeles, was never reprimanded. He continued his military career and retired as a colonel in 1950. The radar operators who reported false contacts faced no consequences. The searchlight crews who shot at clouds kept their positions. The officers who repeatedly failed to communicate with civilian authorities were never disciplined. The military's position was simple. Mistakes were made in the fog of war, but everyone acted in good faith based on the information available. Given the genuine threat following Pearl Harbor and the Elwood attack, the response was understandable, if unfortunate. Lessons were learned, procedures were improved, and that should be sufficient. But civilian victims and their families saw things differently. They had experienced terror at the hands of their own military. They had lost loved ones, not to enemy action, but to American panic. They had suffered property damage that was never fully compensated, and they received no real explanation, no apology, and no justice. The most comprehensive investigation came not from the military, but from Congress. In 1942 and 1943, the House Military Affairs Committee held hearings on coastal defense and civil defense. Witnesses described the chaos, the poor communication, the waste of resources. But the hearings produced no major reforms. The military simply waited them out, secure in the knowledge that Congress's attention span was short and the war would soon provide more pressing concerns. The final report acknowledged problems but made no specific recommendations for fixing them. It praised the dedication of military personnel. It emphasized the difficulty of balancing security with transparency. And it concluded that coastal defense, while imperfect, was necessary for maintaining civilian morale. In other words, the panics were unfortunate, but they served a purpose by demonstrating the government was taking defense seriously. The message to civilians was clear: your fear is useful, your trauma is acceptable, and your government will continue doing exactly what it's been doing. The legacy: from coastal defense to nuclear terror. The patterns established during World War II coastal defense drills would be amplified to grotesque extremes during the Cold War. The duck and cover drills that traumatized World War II children became even more absurd when applied to nuclear weapons. The air raid sirens that sent Los Angeles into panic in 1942 would become tornado sirens, air raid warning systems, and civil defense networks designed to provide minutes of warning before thermonuclear annihilation. The lies became bigger. During World War II, officials claimed coastal defenses could protect American cities. During the Cold War, they claimed backyard bomb shelters and school evacuation procedures could protect Americans from weapons that could vaporize entire metropolitan areas. The fear became more existential. Japanese invasion was scary. Nuclear apocalypse was terror on a civilizational scale. But the fundamental dynamic remained the same. Governments using fear to control populations, military exercises terrifying civilians, and official communications oscillating between reassurance and alarm depending on political needs. The Battle of Los Angeles established the template. The Cold War perfected it. In 1946, the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey published its analysis of Pearl Harbor. The report examined how the Japanese had planned and executed their attack. It compared Japanese tactics to American peacetime exercises, and it reached a stunning conclusion. The Pearl Harbor attack was essentially identical to Admiral Harry Yarnell's Fleet Problem 13 exercise of 1932. The timing was the same, Sunday morning. The approach was the same, carriers from the northeast. The tactics were the same, two-wave attack with fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo planes. Even the target priority was the same, battleships first, then cruisers and destroyers, then airfields and support facilities. Japanese planners had studied Yarnell's exercise and adopted it almost wholesale. The report's authors didn't explicitly blame American commanders for ignoring Yarnell's warnings, but the implications were clear. America had been shown exactly how vulnerable Pearl Harbor was, had been given 9 years to fix the problems, and had chosen to do nothing. Admiral Taylor's 1932 protest that Yarnell's attack was unsportsmanlike and the Japanese pilots lacked the skill to execute it had been proven catastrophically wrong. When journalists tracked down Admiral Yarnell in 1946, hoping for an "I told you so" moment, they were disappointed. The 68-year-old retired admiral was gracious and restrained. He said, "I'm not interested in assigning blame. I'm interested in ensuring we learn from our mistakes." The fact that my 1932 exercise predicted Pearl Harbor so accurately suggests that carrier aviation's potential was apparent to anyone who looked carefully. The tragedy is that so few did. He was more bitter about Fleet Problem 13's suppression. We proved that Hawaii was vulnerable. We proved that carrier aviation was the future of naval warfare. And what happened? The battleship admirals declared the exercise invalid and went back to preparing for the last war. That's the real scandal. Not that Pearl Harbor happened, but that we were shown it could happen and chose to ignore the warning. Yarnell died in 1959. His obituaries mentioned his role in demonstrating Pearl Harbor's vulnerability, but the story never received the attention it deserved. America wasn't ready to confront the uncomfortable truth. Pearl Harbor wasn't just a failure of intelligence or readiness. It was a failure to learn from our own exercises, to listen to prophetic warnings, and to accept that the military doctrines we cherished might be obsolete. The forgotten victims. In researching this story, one of the most frustrating challenges is the lack of documentation about civilian casualties from coastal defense exercises. Military records are exhaustive about ordnance expended, units involved, and lessons learned. But civilian deaths, injuries, and property damage received minimal attention. Many incidents were never officially recorded. Others were classified and remain so to this day. We know 5 civilians died during the Battle of Los Angeles because those deaths were publicly reported and investigated. But how many others died in similar incidents across the country? How many heart attacks during air raid drills? How many traffic fatalities during panicked evacuations? How many children traumatized by duck and cover drills? The numbers don't exist because nobody bothered to count. This amnesia itself is revealing. It demonstrates how thoroughly military priorities superseded civilian welfare. The deaths were unfortunate but acceptable. The trauma was regrettable but necessary. The panic was understandable given the circumstances. Always the passive voice, always the euphemisms, always the implication that nothing could have been done differently. But things could have been done differently. The military could have communicated better with civilians. Exercises could have been announced in advance. False alarms could have been quickly corrected rather than allowed to fester. Vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, the chronically anxious, could have been given special consideration. None of this happened because it would have required admitting that civilian welfare mattered as much as military readiness. And in the calculus of total war, that admission was unthinkable.
79 years after the Battle of Los Angeles, one question still haunts the historical record. What did those searchlight operators actually see at 3:16 a.m. on February 25, 1942? The official explanation, weather balloons reflecting searchlight beams, is almost certainly correct, but it's also fundamentally unsatisfactory. How could experienced military personnel, including officers and NCOs who had been training for months, all simultaneously mistake a weather balloon for an enemy aircraft? How could that mistake persist for 74 minutes of continuous firing? How could nobody realize they were shooting at nothing? The answer lies in the psychology of threat perception. When you're primed to see enemies, when you've been told attack is imminent, when you're surrounded by others who believe they're under attack, critical thinking collapses. The human brain will construct narratives that confirm expectations rather than challenge them. Those searchlight operators saw what they expected to see. And once the shooting started,
Confirmation bias locked everyone into a shared delusion that only ended when ammunition ran low and dawn approached. This has profound implications beyond World War II coastal defense. It speaks to how organizations, military and civilian, respond to perceived threats, how easily panic can spread, how difficult it is to say stop once group momentum builds, how people in authority, once committed to a course of action, will rationalize and defend it even in the face of contrary evidence. The Battle of Los Angeles wasn't just about mistaken identity or technological limitations. It was about collective psychology in crisis. And viewed through that lens, it becomes not an isolated incident, but a template for understanding organizational panic across history. The story of America's coastal defense drills during World War II is ultimately a story about fear and the industrial-scale manufacture of terror. The military didn't intend to terrorize civilians. The politicians didn't want people to panic. The commanders giving orders believed they were protecting American cities. But intentions don't determine outcomes, and the outcome was clear. Millions of Americans experienced years of trauma inflicted by their own government in the name of defending them. The mathematics of this failure are stark. Japanese forces conducted 2 minor attacks on the continental United States, causing 0 casualties. American coastal defense measures killed at least 5 civilians directly and countless others indirectly through stress-related illnesses, traffic accidents, and panic-induced injuries. We spent billions of dollars in 1940s currency building defenses against an enemy who couldn't attack us. We tied down hundreds of thousands of military personnel who were desperately needed elsewhere. We traumatized children with drills designed to make them feel unsafe. And we learned almost nothing from the experience. When Fleet Problem 13 demonstrated Pearl Harbor's vulnerability in 1932, we ignored it. When the Battle of Los Angeles demonstrated that panic and poor communication could turn defenders into threats, we classified the incident and moved on. When post-war analysis showed that coastal defenses had been unnecessary, we filed the reports and forgot about them. The pattern is consistent. American military and political institutions are very good at identifying problems and very bad at fixing them. Admiral Yarnell's prophecy came true. The flying milk bottles he warned about in a different context became the Japanese carrier aircraft over Pearl Harbor. The lessons he tried to teach were learned only after thousands died. And the coastal defense apparatus we built in response to Pearl Harbor never faced the test it was designed for, leaving us to wonder whether it would have performed any better than it did during exercises and false alarms. For the civilians who lived through these years, who dove under desks, who fled blacked-out streets, who watched their own artillery light up the sky, who taught their children to fear the sound of aircraft, the war on the home front was very real. They were casualties of a different kind of warfare, not kinetic, but psychological. Not intentional, but no less damaging. They were the victims of when the Navy invaded its own town, when coastal defense became coastal terror, and when the greatest threat to American cities came not from across the Pacific, but from the panic and overreaction of those sworn to protect them. The searchlights that swept Los Angeles skies on February 25, 1942, were looking for an enemy. They found one.
It was their own fear projected upward into the darkness, impossible to hit and impossible to defeat. And in the end, that was the real lesson of America's coastal defense drills. Sometimes, the most dangerous enemy is the one you create yourself.